Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around innovation and purpose in the world. I kind of changed it up. A friend of mine gave me some good feedback about doing something being a little bit vague, and we want to inspire people and share inspired stories that are actually making impact. So bear with me as I work through that a little bit, but we're here again. I'm still in Accra. It's actually I think the season's changing. The raining season is coming. There's a bit of wind, making it a little bit cooler. So that's kind of nice. And I'm talking to New York today, but my guest has a very interesting global story, which I'm excited to dive into. He is an international human rights lawyer, and he's working at the intersection of human rights and global health. He's the founder of the Open Source Pharma Foundation, which aims to create a new paradigm for drug discovery and generate affordable new cures in areas of great human health need. And he's also the founder of the India Nutrition Initiative, which is developing DFS, which we'll talk a little bit more about. It's DFS, a salt that is double fortified with iron and iodine to address to address malnutrition caused by iron deficiency. So DFS has reached millions of people already. And so these are kind of the things that inspire me. He's an old friend of mine. It inspired me to ask him to join us because he's just really on the cusp of science and innovation. And I'm happy to host Mr. Jaykumar Menon. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Florence. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes. So let's get right to the business of our conversation. So tell us, where are you from and where are you local and what is your craft?
All right. I suppose one should start not with you, but with the ancestry and ancestors. So for me, that comes from the southern part of India, the state of Kerala, which is sort of like the Hawaii of India. It's a long strip of land on the west coast near the tip. And my father was born in Burma, actually, and mother in Kerala.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, and I recently had the good fortune of going to Burma recently to see where he grew up. And I, like Abraham Lincoln, was born in Kentucky and raised in Illinois.
Okay.
Yeah. Like him, became a lawyer, and I'm about the same height as him, so I push that analogy wherever I can, because it's a great story to try to live up to. And I have been on the east coast of the U.S. quite a bit, and in Canada. And let's see, what have you asked? What is my location? Is that right?
Yep. So where you're from, where you're local.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I'm local here in New York. I have been local in Canada, in Montreal and Ottawa. And I have co-founded two organizations that are local in India, one in New Delhi and one in Bangalore. And so I kind of go back and forth between all three countries regularly.
Okay. That sounds, again, very Glocal. Very Glocal citizen you are. Okay. So tell us more about how you are a human rights lawyer. Mm-hmm. So how did you go from being a human rights lawyer to being a founder of these tremendously innovative endeavors?
Well, I was a regular lawyer doing regular court cases, albeit on international human rights issues and domestic human rights issues. But I'd always been thinking about, human rights means negative rights and positive rights. The negative rights are don't torture me, don't infringe on my right to free speech. But the positive rights are sort of economic and social rights, right to be as healthy as you can, the right to have certain social rights. These are called positive rights. And I was always interested in that. And so one day it was a great moment in litigation. We had freed a man from death row, and he evaded, the electric chair. And we were sitting around a bunch of lawyers that night in New York. And one of them said something to me that I always remember. He said, it's great that this case was won, but the return on investment was not very high. It was rather inefficient. It took 15 lawyers, 15 years to free this one person. And I thought that was one of the most boorish things that one could say, particularly at a moment like that, where, we had saved somebody from death. But the words resonated with me, and I was really thinking that, that was a lot of effort for one person. And what if my clients could be not one person, but millions or billions of people? And so I had this creative bent, and was interested in exploring that side of things, and I got the chance to. And so that was kind of how I made the transition from, I guess, one side of human rights to the other, from court case litigation to sort of advocating for and trying to create and realize the right to health at some scale.
Interesting. So then what was it like to do that, I guess, sort of pivot, right? Because you're working for firms, you're working in a law firm, I'm assuming, you're, on the potential partner track or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, I want to do more. I want to do better. How did you make that move?
So I had been working at a nonprofit law firm, and then I went to a private sector law firm that did international law. And some of the cases from the nonprofit take forever, so I was still doing them while I was at the private firm, and that was at that time that we won the death penalty case. And then I started thinking, do I want to be a litigator for my life? I didn't enjoy it very much. I thought it was intellectually interesting, but it was kind of a pain, at least for me, to do. I disliked many parts of it. And I had been an entrepreneur at one point, like right out of school. I started up a tech company, and I'm a creative.
Oh, you said a what kind of company?
An internet company, actually. Right out.
Internet. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the tech side of things. Wait. Okay. Stop. What was that?
So it actually has still been going until maybe very recently, where it might be fading. But it was sort of an early social media company. And we set it up with some college classmates. It was based in Miami, and I went through the whole paces. The whole sort of paces: angel, VC funding, customers, all that stuff. And so I had that bit of background in me, and I was a creative writer. And I thought, let me try and do something sort of social entrepreneurial if I could. But I knew I wanted to kind of shift from litigation. So I was thinking about a few things at that point. I was thinking about academia. I was thinking about a lot of things. I ended up, for family reasons, moving to Montreal, and I applied to jobs at, my joke is, McDonald's, McSweeney's, which is a literary publisher, McGill, which is a university up there, and McKinsey. And the only one that came through was McKinsey, and so I did it, and I was terrible at it. I mean, I could understand it all, but I wasn't very fast at making PowerPoints and doing Excel. So I did that for a little bit. And I didn't quite believe in it either, but it was helpful to me to get me to that place. And then from there, I kind of got into this whole global social innovation world that I'm now in. I went from there and I got a job at the X Prize Foundation as kind of head of their education and international development programs. And this was a sort of high-flying nonprofit that does, what do they call it, radical innovation for the benefit of humanity. And so I worked there.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember. Are they still operating?
Yeah, they still are. They're in California. They're based in California. And then from there, I kind of took the plunge and started my own 2 ventures. And those are the ones that are still going now, that I still work with. And, they're funded by philanthropies and governments, and I work for them. And so one is in they're both in global health. One is in malnutrition, and one is in medicine for all.
So what would you say you took away from the X Prize Foundation space? Because I feel like one of these, I think, started with you competing for one of the prizes, right? Am I right, or am I kind of reaching for that?
Yeah, no, I think that was more, well, there's always a lot of competition, but that kind of happened a little later. I just kind of joined there as a staffer. They were interested in, they did space, prizes for flying to space. And I went there to try and, I was lucky. I went there to try and see if they could take their approach and apply it to social issues. And it obviously applies, so that there was a lot of thought that went into it. And we kind of figured out how the model worked, and helped launch actually the Innovation Prize approach in the international development community. And
that's what I remember.
Boil it down was, instead of doing like a $10 million prize for one person to build a spaceship, could you do like a $1 prize for 10 million people to do something else, for example, or a prize for attainment of sustainable development goals, and these types of, or a prize to like use computers to develop drug candidates for tuberculosis. These types of things are what we were experimenting with.
Interesting. So which was first? I know, but I'm just indulging my listeners. Which came first for you in terms of your entrepreneurial endeavors?
So the first one was this, in this kind of, I guess, I mean, in a sense, I view all of them as entrepreneurial. And like, as an undergrad, I was an activist, and then that's kind of entrepreneurial. The word entrepreneur it doesn't mean, private sector commercial venture. It's a French word meaning, I think, one who undertakes. And so, yeah. And so there was that. There was the startup company. Each of the cases were like these long shot ventures, where we had to kind of have an idea and assemble people. But then in terms of formal social entrepreneurship, the first project was the SALT. And so we basically, I think the whole big thing is, I think all of this depends on social movements and political context and all that. That's the most important thing, Innovation is sort of like a little stopgap paltry thing. The systems are the important thing. But having said that, so we looked at, I guess the lens was, we're here on this earth, and, I'm probably going to be able to not starve to death. I've been given a lot. I was born in America, I got educated, etc. And so then how can we spend our time on earth that's most meaningful and interesting? And maybe it is that, it's the thing, if you line everybody up on earth who is my age and rank them in terms of opportunities, education, nutrition, calories, health, housing, would probably be in the top 0.1% or top 1% or something. And so I thought, well, what can I kind of do with this life? And maybe it's to try to make things better at large scale, was the kind of goal at age 18 or 19. And I got a chance to be able to do that. And so in that vein, it was like the lens was, is there a problem that's serious, that affects more than 1 billion people, that could be subject to transformative change through a sort of open innovation type approach? And then the SALT project really resonated for me. It was like, it seemed like it was really high potential. And so I kind of got involved with the people who were already working on it and started to help them out, and things grew from there. And so that was the first project. There's specifics of what it is, but that was how it started.
Yeah. So let me dive a little deeper and ask why the where. So why the where, particularly where you started with the SALT, and to some extent, why the where in terms of all of your problem-solving focus, like from a geographical perspective?
Yeah, I guess, in the litigation, it was really local a lot of times. It was New York City courts. I was living in New York. My license was in New York. The cases were there. There were some global cases, although those often were in court in New York where I was licensed. Then I started thinking about the global problems, I guess because I have kind of, I'm not that far removed from the global South. I consider myself part of it in a way, and I think growing up, I used to go back to India, and I had a sense that there was a larger world outside of, what you see in small town America. And I think it made quite a big impression on me. I was a sensitive kid, and, I would see people, walking around on their hands with their limbs deformed. And it was just kind of stunning, and it made a big impression on me. And I kind of realized that, there's a sort of larger sort of issue of global justice, that underlies everything. And so that where kind of made me think globally for a long time. And then for these specific projects, the people I hooked up with were based in Canada. The first implementation that we did was in India, kind of rolling out double fortified salt there. And that was because I had some contacts there. The problem was very severe and widespread there. We got some government support from state governments to work on this. And so this project, if you look at there's a slide in the slide deck that shows, like, speaking of global, like the players in the project, it looks like an octopus. It's got like Ottawa, Montreal, Seattle, North India, Jaipur, Western India, Mumbai. And, the stuff is made in a lab in Toronto, and then made in a factory in Jaipur, and then goes up to Uttar Pradesh and North India, and went out to 10,000 village stores across the state. And so it was just that's truly global kind of project.
So you basically founded this, and it becomes, it's a not-for-profit, but what exactly is the business model in terms of, like, how do you sustain it? How is it being sustained? I know that you mentioned public-private partnerships, but in terms of distribution, and it's a not-for-profit that's based in India or US based?
So it's a kind of consortium. One key element is key player is a nonprofit in India, but then it's a consortium of groups. It's, the University of Toronto, which has a lab, It's the Gay Foundation, which is a funder. It's the Tata Trust in Mumbai, which is a funder. It's the government of Canada, which is a funder. It's 3 state governments in India, which are funders. So the business model is basically, at this point, it's kind of open source. I think the project must have in total 25 million plus in funding. And that pays for tech transfer salaries and actual salt additives and things. And so basically, we take a little, what's the phrase? I think it's a poem by Blake, The World in a Grain of Sand or something like that. So this is like the world in a grain of salt. So there's like a little thing that looks like a grain of salt. It's white on the outside. It's the size of a grain of salt, but inside is some iron. That's what it is. We take that and the salt, so that part, the IP is provided for free. And then the people who make that pellet get paid, and the people who sell the salt get paid, and the purchaser of the salt is the government and consumers. And that's how it all kind of works economically. And it's not that expensive. It's, it costs like a few cents per person per year to add the iron to the salt. So right now, the big purchaser has been the state governments, which decided to pay for all this iron, and actually not even pay for the iron, but even pay for some of the salt itself, so it goes out super cheap to the people.
So there's that subsidy that's involved in investing in.
That's right.
And so kind of on the evaluation and like the science study side of it, do you have like some kind of longitudinal study that's looking at communities that are using this versus communities that are not, so that you have like clear indicators of the impact?
Yeah, great question. Usually in nutrition, you don't have this. You only have it in like pharma where there's a lot of money. But this is an exception. So there were what's called efficacy studies, which are small randomized controlled trials showing that this worked in a controlled setting. And there's been 2 or 3. And then even more rarely, there's what's called an effectiveness study, which is not a randomized controlled trial, but just a controlled trial. It means the thing is out in the wild. And so there's a district with 2 million people that has the salt widespread, and the adjoining district with a couple million people does not. And we kind of sampled at a population level scale over time. And it came out. The paper is published in one of the Oxford University journals, and it showed that the course of about a year that iron deficiency dropped roughly 20% at a population scale. So this is a kind of huge advance. I mean, this is a problem that's been intractable, really. And we made a headway on it in one of the more difficult operating environments in the world. And we did it at scale. I mean, so this salt has gone out to tens of millions of people and has reduced iron deficiency at scale.
Wow. So that's amazing. Yeah. I was just listening to a program that was basically talking about how widespread anemia is. And so at least nearly 50% of adult women have iron deficiency anemia during childbearing ages. Children, it's closer to 10%. And I think maybe, I'm not sure if that's global or if it's in Ghana, but it's a serious challenge. And so in terms of solving that problem, what is the long-term effect of, we know that anemia is not a great thing, but just really from a nutritional standpoint, having fortified iron does what for people?
Yeah. So it's a key nutrient. It's what lets oxygen bind to your red blood cells. And so it's essential on so many things. So if you don't have enough iron, it disproportionately affects women and children. Your energy levels are lower. Your cognitive capacity is lower. Maternal mortality rises. You may not die, but you're living unless it's, of course, what I just said, maternal mortality. But otherwise, it kind of just diminishes your potential in serious, measurable ways. And so, about 2 billion people in the world. This is why we picked the problem. Actually, I should say this. So, about 2 billion people in the world don't have enough iron. 2 billion. Yeah. The most widespread form of malnutrition in the world. One of the most widespread problems in the world. And then iodized salt reaches 5 billion people every day. So we thought, if we add some iron to the salt, we might be able to address this problem. So,
sure. So it's already So already a processed good that you're just refining with a new or future fortifying. Wow, that's awesome. So right now, are you only in India? Do you have plans to push it out? Like, twofold question on that marketing side of things. Does the community really know that this is a product that they should be going for? And how are you spreading that word in terms of marketing and being kind of the on the ground marketing? And how are you letting other countries know that this is something that's available?
Yeah, so great question. So in this recent pilot, there were, signs in the village stores saying this is double fortified salt. There's women health workers who thousands of them were trained in what this is, and they went out to their respective villages and talked about it. There were government signs. The chief minister of the state was on a poster. The prime minister of India was on a poster saying double fortified salt. He gave a speech saying, this is important. So we pushed it out as best we could, but although we could always do more. We're starting to look at commercial channels too, like companies could make it and sell it. And in Tanzania, we have a small presence now. There's a quadruple fortified salt, and we are doing clinical trials in Tanzania and India now to help move that forward. And I think the ideal scenario is if it really proves out, and it's a big if, and so far the data has been good, then we could maybe kind of roll it out to 1 billion people across 7 countries. And I think the target countries would be a few in South Asia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Indonesia, all of which have we have existing ties to, or in Nigeria, there's just 3 salt manufacturers really that cover the whole country. And so if we get to them, we can reach a lot of people quickly. And these are places where the iron deficiency is principally in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa is where it's most prevalent.
Interesting. And so when you said quadruple fortified, what is quadruple fortified?
Yeah. So the regular salt is commonly iodized, then the double fortified is with iron, and then the quadruple is with vitamin B12 and folic acid. And those both help with anemia as well. And folic acid prevents neural tube birth defects.
Right.
And these are mandatory,
Awesome.
like in many countries around the world. Like if you ever the grocery store, the salt, the wheat flour is fortified with iron, and so this is just using a lot of people don't eat wheat flour though, but everybody eats salt. So that was the idea.
That is so awesome. I've told you this before. I'm like, this is just like, haha, light bulb. So let's move on into, you've spoken about, working in these countries and then rolling something out. Let me ask you my Glocal speak question. So tell us something that you hear and that is a really important part of your Glocal speak vernacular.
All right. Well, there's some great phrases that I hear. English is spoken in many countries now. We're speaking in English.
Right.
And in every place, English is a bit different. So I've gotten to learn some good Indian business English. So one is in an email you write PFA, and that means please find attached.
Okay. PFA, that's a good one.
And then another one, and I'm starting to use these phrases now. I'll say I will revert, instead of I will get back to, I'll revert.
Yeah, that's true. Like I didn't start saying that until or writing that until I moved here. So
And the best one I think is please do the needful. And then in Kerala, there's a kind of philosophical phrase we say, like, we are like that only. It's just like, c'est la vie. That's how things are.
We're like that only.
Yeah, this is our nature. We are like that only. In Canada, let's see. Think of a good Canadian phrase and a good New York phrase. What would be a good New York phrase? Just the antagonistic New York. You want a piece of me?
That's when you hear. That's for sure. Yeah. So speaking of Canada, and especially Montreal, how is your French?
Oh, it was pretty poor. So I struggled, especially there were some work projects in French, and mostly ended up doing English projects. Because I was too abysmal.
Luckily, right? Yeah. Montreal is a city that you can definitely get around with just English. I can appreciate, Canadian French a little bit. Like I'm enamored by Francophone French just because they speak the way Africans speak in terms of the speed of talk and things like that. So that makes French a lot easier. But I get it in terms of like understanding those places. So speaking of being in being in all these places, we're in this global pandemic now, and you are in global pharma. So tell us more about Open Source Pharma Foundation, because we are in all the news is, this today, the Chinese vaccine is now part of the COVAX piece, for COVID-19. So first of all, tell us about the origins of getting to pharma and then how that now is so relevant and so important in the context of our global pandemic.
Yeah. The origins meaning like how I started in it or how the project started or?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
when I was at XPRIZE, I encountered a project in the government of India called Open Source Drug Discovery. I was like, wow, this is super interesting. They focused on tuberculosis, where big pharma
I remember.
didn't have enough financial incentive to focus. And they were using computers to kind of crowdsource potential cures and then taking that to government labs for testing and taking forward. And it was all just in an area of market failure where conventional industry really couldn't focus. And it was, of course, hugely important. It's like TB is like iron deficiency. It's like 2 billion people have the bacteria in their body every year. I mean, TB is just terrible. It's like a COVID every year. I mean, the TB death toll is about the same in 2020 as COVID was in 2020, and it happens every year, and nobody pays attention to it. As one of the professors in India said, like with COVID, it affected people who. I mean, this is some months ago now, so it's no longer appropriate or apt, but he said COVID affects people who eat in restaurants and go on airplanes, and that's why it became a big deal, whereas TB but so we got interested in that. The prime minister changed in the government of India and the program didn't continue, but I thought it was a good idea and managed to like help it revive and take root in a nonprofit outside of the government context and get some funding for it. And we continued to work on TB, and they phrase it very nicely. They said the closed-door, market-driven approach to drug and medicine development just doesn't deliver for diseases of the poor. The fact remains that most diseases have no approved cure at all. 95% of them actually don't, because there's not a lot of financial return in diseases that are affecting poor or very few people, et cetera. So that's how it got started, and we've kind of latched on to like 2 or 3 ways of doing it. One is AI and machine learning for drug discovery because it doesn't cost very much, and so we can at least do that stuff relatively cheaply. And the other big idea.
So wait, tell us more about how that. So AI and machine learning. So what does that mean?
So I'll give you an example. We had for a while a village lab in India, and people would sit in this like open air sort of hut with the thatched roof wall, and they'd be on their laptops. And we were able to connect them to the supercomputer system of the government of India, and they looked at a model of the tuberculosis bacteria online, and then they would take a model of a drug and try and dock them together and see where they fit properly, and to see whether the molecule could potentially be a drug for TB.
Got it.
So that's kind of how it works. Rather than doing all the experiments in a lab with petri dishes, you can kind of simulate them on the computer. And do it a lot faster.
Okay.
And you can also scan millions of things really fast.
Right.
So it's kind of early stage drug discovery on the computer, basically.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And we do a lot of education and training. And then the second thing that we really latched onto was this big hole that we saw. Like you can take a drug or a vaccine now, it turns out, that's off patent and that belongs to the whole world. And sometimes it might work against a different disease. And because it's already approved, you can go really fast and you can skip that 10 years of funding and development and go right to very late stage clinical trials to see if it works against the new disease. And so this is like 1,000x cheaper than the big pharma method. And it's like, maybe 5 or 10x faster.
Yeah.
And nobody has really an incentive to do it. So it's kind of neglected. But so we gave it a try and it's been working. So we have a drug for tuberculosis that just finished phase 2B clinical trials. And we got in, usually it might take $100 million to get to that stage. And we did it for like less than $50,000, And,
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So how are you telling that story though?
So we're telling it as much as we can. So, I mean, we need to tell it more.
Yeah.
The press we've had has been, Fast Company. I gave a Google talk. The Economist mentioned us. BBC mentioned us. Stayed up till 5 a.m. last night writing an op-ed for The Guardian in London. But we need more attention because it's a huge success story. And I think the world should be showering us with money. And I think individuals should shower us with money because we're making,
I think so too. I think so too. So So tell us, so where are you financially with that? So you talked about kind of the process, but
Yeah.
For the SALT project, you had
Yeah.
a consortium
Yeah.
of public-private partners that helped fund this one.
Yeah.
How was this one, the 50,000, where did that come from? How are you funding this, and what is the revenue model on an open source pharma basis?
First of all, I do want to make a pitch. I think we're starting to get into crowdfunding, so I think we need to do that, and we're developing that a bit. And very interestingly, the polio vaccine, which was the big vaccine before COVID in America, was crowdfunded. If you've ever heard of it.
Was it? Oh yeah, by big philanthropy, right?
By school children. So
really?
Yeah. So it's a great story.
Oh.
So yeah, it's called the March of Dimes. They sent in dimes.
And that's where they originated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the original. They made it basically an open IP vaccine. And so we're working on open IP COVID vaccines. This is our big project now, Florence, the people's vaccine for the whole world. And ours are going to be not only open IP, where everybody can make them who's qualified, but they're also going to be technically and substantively better, because they will protect against many diseases at once. So if you have a variant of COVID, you might not have to go get another different vaccine. This will be ready on day one of a pandemic because it's broad spectrum. We're making and so we don't have to wait for a year or 2 or 3 to get a new vaccine for each pandemic. We can be ready on day one or even before. So this is our big project. It's called Vaccinuum. And we have
Vaccinuum.
Yep. It's like as in and it's sort of broad spectrum open IP vaccines for the whole world to stop this pandemic and future pandemics before they even start. And we have global scientific leadership on this. So the science is very, very strong. And so far, to answer your question, we've been philanthropically funded so far. So and government as well. So it's been very blue chip. Tata, Soros, Rockefeller, Wellcome, the philanthropies, and government of India is the government. So, but I think we probably need to broaden it, because this is everybody in the whole world is thinking about, for example, COVID vaccines, and the open source is really conducive to people's participation, I think. So we're starting a phase 3 clinical trial in Brazil. And if people want to, if we want to actually raise funds to expand the robustness of that trial. And what we're doing is basically doing the off-patent vaccines. Some of them, like the measles or tuberculosis vaccines, for example, or flu, which is a low-cost vaccine, have potential against COVID. And they're widely available right now, whereas right now only a small percentage of the people in the world can get access to a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine or whatever. But this is something that people can do today. And in fact, I did it while I was waiting, before the COVID vaccines were out. I went and got myself an MMR vaccine.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Just to think about immunity.
Yeah.
Wow, this is amazing stuff. I mean, so how do you attract the open source participants? When I think of open source, I definitely think about like the days of early tech and what was it? Wasn't Mozilla like an open source to start? Yeah. So all of that. So how, and that was like, not to be, condescending, but that was like Revenge of the Nerds. So it was just like a very nerdy thing where people just kind of like hopped on and did it. How are you now attracting the talent that is actually, and what is the profile of your, I guess, what would you call them? Programmers?
Community members, open source pharma community members. So we're on 6 continents now, everyone but Antarctica. And we have an artist in residence. So we have some artists and filmmakers that are with us. There's a bunch of scientists and science students. And the students, we teach classes on Zoom every day. Like the free version of Zoom is 40 minutes. So the class is 38 minutes long.
Okay.
And you get to learn computation for drug discovery and stuff like that.
Wow.
We have a big social media presence. I mean, a lot of people on WhatsApp, like thousands, and like hundreds of WhatsApp groups, and Facebook and stuff too. We also have a kind of cadre of sort of elite scientists. So we're talking like top 10 scientists in the world kind of people who like our humanitarian mission and see that we're filling a gap, because usually that prowess only goes to, not to the greatest health need, and we give them that opportunity.
Yeah. So who are, we talk about celebrity, but I've always felt like the scientists get, short shrift on that. So when you say the top 10 scientists in the world, who are they? Who would you say
so
are
we
those
have
people?
Some people who have been advising us. Let's see. So one is Dr. Robert Gallo, his name is.
Gallo?
Yeah, Gallo. And he is a great individual. He's the co-discoverer of HIV, and he should have won the Nobel Prize. The co-winner of the Nobel Prize said that he should have won. He's won 2 Lasker Prizes, the only scientist to do that, which is like the American Nobel. And he was in science and in academia, I guess, one way that people get ranked, so to speak, is by how often you publish and how often those publications are cited by other people or referenced by other people, right? Like you publish something in a journal, and do other people, say, hey, and cite it in their work. And so he was the #1 most cited scientist in the world. So,
oh wow,
so he's like stratospheric. So he's up there. Then we have a person who was the former head of R&D for 2 big pharmas, head of the global health program at the Gates Foundation. He's an advisor. We have the ex-head of the National Lab System of India, and somebody who's a pharma innovation specialist who's known in the field, who is like ranked top 25 most influential people in pharma in the world. This kind of caliber of people. We're collaborating. We've been interacting quite a bit with the scientist at Columbia, who was named Time Magazine Person of the Year at one point. And so we're kind of working with the scientific elite and also with students and artists,
Okay. Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So where do you see this open source pharma project in 5 years?
My vision is that we would like to have a sort of infrastructure where if somebody somewhere wanted to help out, a student or a volunteer, a retired scientist or a citizen even, they could kind of participate in discovering a medicine, or even a kid, a sort of TikTok for drug discovery. So we'd really like to get the community really going, because there's a saying in software, with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. So I think the room for people to participate, even part-time, if we put our collective brain power on this stuff, we might be able to solve these unsolved issues. And these unsolved issues are not a sliver; they're actually like the majority. So we need a new model.
Yeah.
And we also want to have delivered our first actual medicines and vaccines. And so we're getting close to that right now with tuberculosis. And we have a potential, I'm thinking actually of like 6 months from now, I'd like to have like a widespread open IP vaccine for the whole world, that could address COVID or future pandemics. And so if this Brazil trial shows that the measles vaccine or the flu vaccine can fight COVID, and these are vaccines that are available the whole world over and are very cheap, that's a really big deal. And and then in terms of a model, we will show that rather than needing $2 billion to make a new medicine, or we could do it for a small fraction of that, and kind of change the landscape of global health. So I guess that's our answer. Yeah.
So how does pharma taking you?
So we actually have good relations with pharma. We work on diseases that are not of interest to them so much. I mean, maybe of humanitarian interest, but not
until now.
Yeah, that's right. Now we're doing COVID, so that's a little bit different.
Until now, so that's something like. Do you have lobbyists? Like, how do you arm yourself from a business perspective and again, a sustainability perspective against capitalism? Because, open source is, the whole nature of it is to socialize.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, we need, Florence, you're going to have to rally us support. So
I'm happy to.
We need all the help we can get. We're fighting the good fight, and we're winning. There's a more sophisticated, nuanced version of the facts, which I wasn't aware of before, but so open source and in the software industry, they coexist happily. Microsoft funds Linux. They operate in different places. They're synergistic. And so, we might see a situation where it's open source for neglected disease and sort of proprietary for lucrative disease, for example. Or else this stuff is pre-competitive. And so even big pharma wants pre-competitive stuff. And they also want to know, they come to us because they want to learn, they know that the world is moving towards open ways of research and knowledge, and they want to learn that stuff too. And they do it themselves quite a bit. And I think one of our areas of focus is really this repurposing of old off-patent stuff, medicines and vaccines. It's very simple. And that doesn't quite fit their business model. So far, they come to our conferences. We have them as advisors. And so I think ultimately in software, they thought they were going to be mortal enemies, but they actually ended up coexisting quite well. So it might end up being something like that.
That's true. That's a good model, and it does work. But I am fearful of the end game because pharma is huge, which we've seen with this whole COVID situation. It's huge. It's a huge lobby.
Yeah.
To the extent of looking for sovereign guarantees and government signing up. It's real. It's very serious stuff.
Yeah.
And so, let me ask you this as well: does plant science have a role in this open pharma?
We do actually, because of our. It was really a Glocal thing. I mean, because of our presence in India, nearby us physically is one of the larger plant science outfits in India. It's a traditional medicine research institution. So in India, there's several systems of plant-based traditional medicine in India that are thousands of years old. One of them is called Ayurveda.
Yeah.
And so this is like a research institute that does Ayurveda. They have, it's a serious place. They have like an Ayurvedic hospital and,
what's the name of the place?
It's called Transdisciplinary University.
Okay.
TDU. Okay. And then the affiliated hospital is IAIM, the Institute for Ayurvedic and Integrative Medicine. And then in Kerala, where we grew up, or my family's from, sorry, when did I say that? My aunt, a distant aunt of mine, actually works at a place called AVS, Arya Vaidya Shala, which is kind of like the Johnson & Johnson of Ayurveda. They have like 500 products and they're 100 years old and hospitals and stuff. And so this stuff is just kind of around. And we thought this is an alternative way of doing health. And we were trying to bridge these paradigms. So we thought like, we actually have a project of AI and Ayurveda.
Nice. Nice.
It actually fits really well because like Ayurveda is too complicated for the regular stuff to study. There's lots of plants and lots of molecules, but AI can handle all that complexity. So we've been trying to explore it.
Nice.
Yeah. So
that is super exciting. Yeah. Super exciting. So with that in mind, let me ask you about a mindset hack. Like the whole idea of like even being able to marry Ayurveda with the technology. What would you say is your favorite or innovative mindset hack?
And if you're talking personal mindset, I guess I've been just doing it lately because this job is very stressful.
So, I can imagine.
I've just started to do like, my first cousin is a yoga teacher, and then she taught me something interesting about yoga that I hadn't known, which is that it's called the 8 limbs of yoga, I think, or the 8 branches. And so I kind of only really conceptualized yoga as that hatha yoga and the asana practice and all that. But she told me about the 8 parts, the moral ethical parts, and then the chanting and the breathing and the asana and the meditation and 3 kinds of meditation, all that. And then it kind of sunk in because we were talking to this scientist who invented the AIDS cocktail, which is the main treatment for AIDS now, which was like many medicines at once. So I like put the 2 ideas together. I was like, okay, I never know which one to do. So let me try all of them. So I'll do all 8. And so I started doing that in the mornings, and it kind of keeps me in a better, more chipper mood, dealing with all the kind of conflict that I have to deal with every day, So
I can imagine. Yeah. Kind of grounding and uplifting at the same time.
And to do it in the morning and get it done, because otherwise you get caught up in the day and it never happens. So that's been helpful lately.
Sure. So is your practice about like an hour, less than an hour?
I'd say ideally like 50 minutes or so. Often ends up being shorter, but it's basically a little of, what is it? I mean, and I do it. I've actually been doing something the majority of the days, I'd say, not the whole shebang, but by something I mean a little chanting, a little pranayama, a little asana practice, a little meditation, and then I add in like a couple minutes of interval training and weights. But each of them were like, obviously, like 5 minutes of each or something, and then I'm done.
Right. Well, the thing we're learning is that it's just the consistency of doing it is more important than like doing these hours and hours of activity, because I think the consciousness that inspires is what is doing the work on your energy system. So nice work, however long you take, and making it consistent. I had a friend once that she introduced me to the 5 Tibetans, which is, these Tibetan monks. This is like the 5 exercises that they do every day. And it's part of their yoga, I believe. It's part of, the whole process of adhering to the 8 limbs. And then when I read the autobiography of a yogi, And he would often say, "Oh, and then the master gave someone their yoga." I kind of was like, "Oh, is that what they were giving? I'm not sure, but let me just see if this is the yoga for me." And so particularly last year when the pandemic hit, and I have a lower back issues, I said, okay, well, let me do these, because there are certain exercises that every practice pretty much says you should do these exercises all the time. So it's 5 different exercises, and it's initially difficult because one of them is spinning. So it's initially hard to get into. So, you start with 7 and then you increment up. But I'd say within 2 weeks, I was up to the 21. That is the recommended. And I do that every day. So it takes about 10 minutes every day. And I can say that it has gotten to strengthen those weaknesses that I had physically. I have a meditation practice aside from that, but it's like just to the point, like 10 minutes of consistent, strengthening, or, want to call it physical therapy, but also a little bit of meditative movement that makes a real impact. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I make that connection with my own self. So aside from, the yoga, tell us more about, when you're not changing the world so tremendously, what's your indulgence? Like, are you a reader? Are you a watcher? Are you a listener? What occupies your leisure time?
I follow the Los Angeles Lakers and the Chicago Bulls too closely.
Okay. So were you missing this dearly during the whole pandemic?
Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
And then, and what else? Family and friends.
Oh, that's right. You have a son that's a basketball player as well.
So, we have that in common. Yeah, just family and friends. In terms of hobbies, a little basketball, not much, and creative writing is something I like, and it actually, you can kind of do it. You can kind of strive for something that's aesthetically perfect, and that's kind of nice,
Yeah, it's true. It's true, and it's just the flow of all of that. But are you a big reader? What kind of reading aside from the science, and even in the science, what are you reading lately?
I mean, on the science, I read papers saying whether certain vaccines from other diseases work against COVID. And then I'm reading less than I like to. I've been reading too much, just like periodicals and stuff online. But in terms of books, I love narrative nonfiction. I'm kind of deep into that, and novels. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What's one of your favorites that you've read? Maybe not recently, but a book that you think our listeners would be interested in.
I've read a little bit, and next on my list is to read some of the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, I guess. I understand he was an emperor of Rome, and he had a lot of practical responsibilities, but this was his philosophy. So I think I'm in the fray right now, so I need that. And then let's see, what have I read recently that I liked? I mean, some of my all-time favorites are Didion, Hemingway, Sherwood Anderson, Bruce Chatwin, and Tom Wolfe.
Okay. Right. Okay, nice. So we'll put some links to that in our show notes. We have really rich show notes today, folks, so be sure to check them out. So, Jaykumar, I have loved having this conversation with you. I always enjoy our conversations, so we always kind of go into these like waves and rabbit holes sometimes, but it's always wonderful. And I don't want to encroach on your precious time and rest from, getting your weekend started. So do you have any last words for our listeners?
Go Glocal and follow Florence. She'll take you to the promised land.
That's a good one. That's a good one. But I also want to ask you to share any information. Do you have any information right now about your crowdfunding? Has it started? Are you in the midst of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can always go to our site, and there's a donate button on it.
Okay,
that's
wonderful.
The elementary form of crowdfunding. If you just Google open source pharma, you can find us. We're the Open Source Pharma Foundation.
And that will be in the show notes, folks. So we'll have that available. Okay. So we'll have great links to all of Jaykumar's work. And we'll be watching this space pretty intently, because this is big news, just kind of, and I'd love to have you back at some point and talk a little bit more about public health in general with a few others, because just looking at the regional solutions and solutions for the South versus solutions for the North, I loved how you made the distinction that, COVID is similar to other we have potential pandemics all the time, but they're not necessarily impacting the North. And so, it's incumbent upon us to really recognize what's important for humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the midst of all this. Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All right, listeners.
Have a great evening. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. You too. You too.
Right. Okay.
So, listeners, this has been another episode of Glocal Citizens. We have a new episode every Tuesday at www.glocalcitizenspod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. That's Apple, Google, Amazon, Audible, actually. You can find us. And so please do listen, subscribe, share, comment, reach out, make suggestions for different Glocal citizens that you'd like to hear from. And until next time, bye for now.